Hi, I'm Stephen Corey. In this video, I am going to explain to you the importance of the Great Path of Order, what it is, and what it means. The assassination attempt on President Donald J. Trump supplied the perfect backdrop for this discussion. Of all the reporting about that attempted assassination, seemingly only Bob Brooks, co-host of American Agenda, related God's hand to the 1-inch difference between a buggered up right ear and a dead former president. I am sure somewhere in newsland someone else made the same proposition, but of the 4 news sources my viewing alternated between through 9 hours of newscasts that weekend, his was the lone voice honoring the hand God plays in the course of our events. Normal science, mass media, and government-controlled schools have diverted our culture onto the intellectual path sanitized of all discourse regarding the God of the Holy Bible. Thanks to the hand God played in the drafting of America's Constitution and our Bill of Rights, the influential shapers of our social philosophies and attitudes have not been able to strip God from the hearts of most American people. However, they have badly buggered up America's public knowledge of God, sniping at every biblical truth from the top of some imaginary wall of separation between church and state, the only clause of a mere letter ever to be given constitutional authority in the Supreme Court. God is stretching out his own hand in our current times to correct our intellectual misgivings about him, his Holy Bible, and his soon returning Son, Jesus Christ. To those who deny and rebuke God, what you are about to hear sounds silly. To those who love God with all their minds, what I am about to say is quite rational. Trump's buggered up right ear was God's call on America to hear his correction of our mistruths. How can that be? Let's explain it through an example. If you were gagged and stuffed inside a steel drum in a yard filled with steel drums, flooded by chaotic knocking sounds, how would you let anyone in the yard know you are there? Maybe you could knock on your drum in very apparent patterns, hoping your orderly knocking would be attention-grabbing above all the other chaotic knockings. God has been locked out of the meaning ascribed to this world's being and activity. All of the world's clamor and knocking seems to be only random and chaotic, shaming the Bible to a level of mythology and regarding its preachers to be kooks. So preaching the Bible's messages is connecting less and less as time moves on. How can God regain thinking people's attention? I attest to you, he is trying to regain their attention through orderly patterns clearly apparent amongst biblically relevant events, correlating with orderly patterns of solar and lunar eclipses. Give me your attention for the next several minutes, even if my proposition sounds silly to you, and I will show you how a patchwork of information is delivering to all of us a clear message from God, as certainly as forensic analysis of orderly patterns delivers convictions in courtrooms across this land. There are very many very orderly patterns occurring in our reality, very far beyond coincidence to explain. God knows rational minds will consider what this all means. He testifies to his own reality as defined in the Holy Bible by making discernible patterns in the relevant events of consistent courses of history. It is easy for man to read a course of history, even if he refuses to acknowledge its trajectory. A great example of this is found in a course of history involving the Ottoman Turk Empire, Israel, and President Donald J. Trump. In 1517, the Ottoman Turks took control of Jerusalem and the land that had belonged to ancient Israel from 2,500 years earlier. On August 21st, 1914, a total solar eclipse stretched its path of totality across the Ottoman Turk Empire. 3 years later, in 1917, they were forced to give up control of Israel's ancient land. The young nation of Israel subsequently re-established in their ancient land in 1948, won possession and control of Old Jerusalem from Jordan in 1967. On August 21, 2017, a total solar eclipse stretched its path of totality across America. December 6, 2017, the great President Donald J. Trump formally declared Jerusalem to be Israel's capital. 3 years later, in 2020, he was forced out of his presidential office by the most suspect of elections in American history. That course of history showed trajectories of Israel's rise to independence as America began declining from truthfulness and civil order into deceit and chaos. But there was more to see than just that. Within this path of events was the important fulfillment of an ancient biblical prophecy. God promised Abraham that Israel would exist as a nation forever, and his prophets showed that the Israelites would become a nation again after wandering throughout the world like a homeless people. Intertwined with the course of history fulfilling those prophecies was the rise of a nation more supportive of Israel than any other, America. But God used time measured into spans of biblically meaningful numbers to accentuate his directive hand in these events and the trajectories of those two nations' histories. Notice that the Ottoman Turk control of Palestine was lost in 1917, 400 years after its control began in 1517. 400 years are 8 50-year spans, that is, 8 jubilees. The biblical meaning of 8 is new beginning. Indeed, 1917 began a new course of history for the land of Palestine and the Jewish people. But what kind of beginning? The biblical meaning of 50 is restoration. Indeed, 31 years later, the ancient nation of Israel was restored in the land of Palestine. Notice that 1967, the year Israel regained control of Old Jerusalem, was 50 years after 1917, completing a 9th Jubilee. The biblical meaning of 9 is the summation of man's affairs. Jesus Christ will reign in Jerusalem from Israel for 1,000 years after he has returned and summed up mankind's evil affairs. 50 years after 1967, the great President Donald J. Trump officially declared America's recognition of Jerusalem to be Israel's capital, completing the 10th Jubilee. The biblical meaning of 10 is perfect completion. Trump's declaration ceremoniously completed Jerusalem for its purpose of receiving Jesus Christ's coming reign. Then, 3 years later, 3 years after America's August 21, 2017 total solar eclipse, all forensically analyzed patterns of actions and evidence show the American people were lawlessly cheated out of their democratic vote.
Grandpa, hey Grandpa, you forgot to tell everyone that a solar eclipse on August 21st is one Elul eclipse. It's important, Grandpa. You see, Elul is a month of the Jewish year. It means changing your mind. If you are against God when Elul starts by its end, you have to be for him. So when the moon covers the sun at the start of Elul, it is a sign from God that you need to turn around. In 1914, a Elul eclipse said it was time to give the promised land back to the Jewish. They didn't. So God took it 3 years later. In 2017, one Elul eclipse said America had to start telling more truth. It didn't. 3 years later, a president was elected who hardly knew where he was or why he was there. A solar eclipse on 1 Elul is important to think about, Grandpa.
Thank you, Robert. Just like you can know a rock stacker meant something when you see a stack of rocks in the woods, you can know our Creator meant something when you see obvious patterns of eclipses in the sky and biblically relevant history in our past. Like the Ottoman Turk Empire's one Elul eclipse preceded its 1917 loss of Palestine 2 Jubilees later, America's one Elul 2017 eclipse preceded the great devastation COVID wreaked upon the economy and our enormously strange 2020 election. Amazingly, that lawless deception and chaotic gaslighting began 400 years to the month after the Mayflower Compact began the process of America's lawful governance. America lost its lawful governance after 400 years, just like the Ottoman Turks lost Palestine after 400 years. That course of history distinguishes a path of orderly numbers and essentially similar events only the directive hand of God could have planned and led forth. I call it the Jubilee Path. And who do we find intertwined within it, Bob Brooks? That's right, the great President Donald J. Trump. But wait, Bob, that was only an example of God using orderly patterns to attract the attention of thinking people. Now for my point about the great President Donald J. Trump and his prominent place in what I call the path of order. The path of order consists of 4 12-year spans, beginning with the great President Ronald Reagan's final year in office, 1988, and ending 2036, the year that signs in the sun, moon, and stars inherently show to be the year of Jesus Christ's return. I call it the path of order because its recurring time spans consist of 12 years each. The biblical meaning of 12 is perfect order. President Reagan and President Trump were cut from the same material. They both stood for truth and the American way of actual justice, although they were both accused of lying and injustice. Neither relied on the ethically declining GOP. They both circumvented the media and communicated straight to their supporters. Reagan returned order to America after the disorderly effects of President Carter's chaos, and Trump returned order after Obama's chaos. But America's present state of disorder is readily apparent to all but the most arrogant and their outright deceivers. After President Trump had made America great again, Joe Biden tore America down again. At least 3/4 of all America's news media, entertainment industry, educational institutions, and unfortunately, a majority of Christian churches and leaders gave cover and support to deeply deceptive philosophies, attitudes, and political antics. From the Russia collusion hoax, through the great COVID deceptions, to the enormously suspicious 2020 election, an avalanche of animosity and cold deceit swept the great President Donald J. Trump into Joe Biden's 2024 kangaroo courts. What is the takeaway from a sniper's bullet grazing President Trump's right ear? Was it God knocking on the intellectual door of his orderly servant? Nearly unanimous chatter about dialing back vicious rhetoric and closing great divisions arose in response to that shot. However good dialing back vicious rhetoric may sound, it will neither close divisions nor end violence. Those are fruits produced by trees grown from seeds of deceit, watered in the sewage of hatred. Merely obstructing that fruit only wastes time that would be far better spent planting seeds of truth by the still waters of peaceful pastures. Lying and hatred grow America's problem with violence and division. They are solved only by filling the public square with truth. But who's to say what's true? Truth speaks through its own evidences to whoever will humbly listen. For example, killing prenatal infants is not healthy. Abortion is not healthy for the prenatal person. Hiding a prenatal human's humanity behind the term fetus is not honest. But the Democrat Party unifies around treating prenatal people like rats, killing them on demand, calling their deaths health care. Most mothers leave those non-health care clinics in physical trauma and with mental anguish that sometimes lasts for years. That is not health care either. Recognizing the self-evidence of death and trauma in the woman's right to choose killing human life is the truth Democrats will never speak. Even so, they have filled America's public square with the vicious call for killing prenatal people, dressing up death care to look like health care. Evidence manifests realities man cannot make up. The New England Primer is evidence of America's Christian roots. Wikipedia admits it became the most successful educational textbook published in the 17th century. But Wikipedia no longer tells you that it remained the most used reading primer through the 18th century and into the 20th century. It is not a topic in America's public square because more than 2/3 of its reading material are quotations of God's Holy Bible and instructions for Christian living. Instead, today's American population are fed lies about American history, covering up its Christian roots and development. Without precedent, the 1962 Supreme Court threw all mention of God and His Bible out of the classroom, turning the education of its surviving children over to the Marxist-bound government. For God's Holy Bible spoke candidly against what transforming America required. You shall not utter a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not follow a multitude to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a suit, turning aside after a multitude so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his suit. Although all men are indeed false, some can be categorized as essentially true, and others as essentially false. Men are either essentially hateful or essentially loving, but none are perfect. Therefore, calling all people to dial back political rhetoric is a deceptive cover for raising an even greater mystery of lawlessness. It feeds styrofoam to starving children, growing no fruit of truth and understanding. Truth defenders should be encouraged to dial up their rhetoric aimed in love. Civil efforts to end deceit should be differentiated, highlighted, rewarded, and encouraged. Truth is self-evident. Therefore, it is sufficiently discernible to confidently support. Deceit is chaos. Truth is order. God points out who is truthful by setting order before a backdrop of chaos. And so, 1988 began the path of order. It was the last year of President Reagan's term in the Oval Office. 12 years later, in 2000, the world entered the 21st century as orderly patterns in history and celestial events became even more prominent, directing even sharper focus on God's control overtaking man's affairs. Then, 2012 presented that once-in-a-celestial age sign spotlighting perfect order in the winter solstice. On December 21st, 2012, Earth aligned with the Sun and the center of our galaxy in the southern gate, through which Sagittarius arrow flies into the heart of Scorpio, killing the sting of death, God's purpose for the 21st century. 12 years later, the enormously important election year 2024 pits the Democrats' self-evident chaotic deception against Trump's verifiable order and regard paid to the truth. America's choice between the two will make no difference in the long run. But for the next 5 years, America can be made greater again for giving more people time to shelter against what is coming. The final 7 years before 2036 will be a span of trouble and great tribulation for all nations, including America. Then Jesus Christ returns to end all lawlessness, chaotic disorder, and arrogant deception to institute orderly righteousness. For that purpose, God knocks on our sky incredible orderly patterns of lunar eclipses intersecting Apophis 2029 and 2036 ventures across Earth's orbit clearly show 2036 to be the year of Jesus' return. Like you have now heard, their very clear orderliness knocks out a message amongst the chaotic chatter of eclipses, the same as you might bang out an orderly message if trapped inside a steel drum. God's very purpose in making signs out of orderly patterns is to forewarn all people that Jesus Christ is coming. If you cannot accept my scientific evaluation of these patterns being that warning, then his return in 2036 will be undeniable evidence too late for any denier's good. Alluding to the days of Noah, he warns us not to carry on with our lives as if nothing is about to change. As were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. God has even embedded that allusion to Noah in the signs he is making for our warning. Watch my video, Göbekli Tepe, Noah's monument to God's ark with a contemplative mind. Notice the biblical narrative of the great flood accurately carved across the top of Göbekli Tepe's Pillar 43. Understand that nowhere in all of archaeology has a set of symbols corresponded precisely to the concepts of a written narrative without concluding that the two were the work of the same artist or culture. In this case, Pillar 43 is the obvious work of Noah. Almost as a verification, in 1993, 43 years before 2036, Klaus Schmidt determined to excavate Göbekli Tepe. What he unearthed there, Pillar 43, attests to Christ's return in 2036. Watch my video, Göbekli Tepe and the Mazzaroth, Part 2. The number 43 occurs many times in the numerous signs I must show you. It seems to always make a verifying mark on the elements of those signs it involves, showing their meaningful engagement with 2036, the year of Christ's return. The next Shemitah year after 2036 is 2043. By that perspective, 43 is 7 more than the biblical number of God's doing it, 3 times the biblical number of complete order, 12. As such, 43 shows God working perfectly spiritual meaning by making complete order. Indeed, 43 stamps its verifying mark upon this path of order. Presidents Reagan and Trump both worked hard to recover America from serious disorder caused by Democrat administrations. Both presidents were shot from the arrogant, disorderly nature God-denying governance has seeded into the American people. 43 years after Hinckley shot President Reagan, God touched President Trump's right ear with Crook's bullet. Inasmuch as God's hand was in Trump's survival, God's call on President Trump to restrain America's fundamental transformation into Marxist atheism is in this path of order. It isn't so much that Crook's bullet symbolized God calling Trump to halt America's chaotic transformation. It is even more that his bullet marked the call President Donald J. Trump heard and responded to 8 years earlier in his first term, beginning the new Make America Great Again spirit in the wiser majority of our people. On page 342 of my book, Clear Signs of Trouble and Great Joy, I wrote about the symbolism made in President Trump's first term. Clear signs make a call to the current American governance and all Americans to follow all evidence to wherever it leads. No dumpsters employed, no censorship allowed, no gaslighting, pieing, or lying to elevate human authority above what's true. Trump's sovereign stand upon the truth as known by its evidences demonstrated his love for every citizen and his desire for their right to possess their own thoughts and direct their own lives, owning their own souls as given to each of them by God personally. Trump's love for all Americans is sincere. God loves man truly. Love is a commitment to working actual benefits for the ones loved. Thus, before 2016, Donald J. Trump saw America's continuing decline into progressive chaos and the suffering it was causing good Americans. God noted in the Bible mankind's abysmal decline towards eternal despair and the suffering it was causing all peoples. Donald Trump descended from his tower into the White House to make America great again for his fellow Americans. Jesus descended from heaven into the form of a man to make eternal joy available again for the truly meek. Trump was a billionaire. He needed no personal gain from the presidency. Jesus was God. He needed no personal gain from sharing in mankind's sufferings. Yet, throughout Trump's mission in office, the rulers of progressive culture deceived the mobs, falsely accused him, and sullied his message. Throughout Jesus' mission on earth, the Jewish rulers deceived the mobs, falsely accused him, and tried to sully his message. At the end of his mission, the enemies of truth crucified Trump's character, stole his office, and tried to scatter his followers. Just like the enemies of truth crucified Jesus, scattered his followers, and tried to steal his office. But in the end, truth will overtake its enemies. Donald J. Trump's presidency was an enormously spiritual part of the clear signs warning the world to prepare for Jesus' return. King David was a metaphor for King Jesus to a nation God was constructing for greatness. President Trump was a metaphor of the crucified Jesus to a once great nation now deconstructed by progressives. As such, one particular psalm of David's metaphor lends essence to Trump's metaphor. Save me, O God, by thy name, and vindicate me by thy might. Hear my prayer, O God, give ear to the words of my mouth. For insolent men have risen against me, ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before them. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will requite my enemies with evil. In thy faithfulness, put an end to them. All meaning in life is written in the facts and circumstances of its events and situations. Truth discovers the meaning for its seekers. Liars and deniers hide it for their own gain. If you think this path of order is not something God would make to warn the observers of truth, then take note of the 70 Shabbats of Daniel 9:24 through 27. It also is a meaningful path of 7-year spans leading from Artaxerxes' decree to rebuild Jerusalem's wall through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, then skipping to the tribulation of 2029 through 2036. There are 3 more paths of Jubilees you must see, as well as the Shemitah path of Shabbats, tying into Daniel's 70th Shabbat, the tribulation of which my videos warn. God is real. He is writing on our ceiling and warning through our deeds. Following truth to wherever it leads deciphers his clear signs. You need to pay attention. Watch my video, Göbekli Tepe and the Mazzaroth, Part 2. It shows you how anciently God has been knocking for mankind's attention. Also watch Introducing the Clear Signs of Jesus' Return. My next video will discuss how lunar eclipses make these patterns, what the patterns are, and how we can know they mean Jesus returns in 2036. I aim to finish it before summer's end. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it or any other of these highly important videos regarding God's call for people to quickly shelter in the truth of Jesus Christ. Think carefully about what you've seen here. If you have not yet discovered the reality of Jesus Christ, if you have not yet accepted his death for your forgiveness, having come to truly know God through him, please do that now. Time is of the essence. Please help me spread this message throughout the world by clicking the like button on my videos, then subscribe to my channel. If you know Jesus, bear witness to his truth. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.